Hello guys. How are you? Okay, so welcome to our lesson today. So in today's lesson, we are going to look at the conversion of units for different quantities. And the quantities that we're just going to focus on this lesson are none other than the common quantities, which is length. And then also we shall look at mass and then also time. So we are going to concern ourselves with these three quantities, and then we'll look at the units that are used for measuring these quantities, and then learn how to convert between any two units. You see that? But the techniques that are going to be learned or discussed in this topic, they apply even for any other unit conversion that you might be tested on. So it doesn't mean that in measurements, these are the only three quantities that you always come across. There are many different quantities that can be measured, example, temperature, and many other things, you see. But for now, we're going to demonstrate the art of unit conversion just by looking at these three quantities, you see. So now, before we go further, let's look at the different units that are used for measuring each of these quantities. So length has many different quantities. One, which is the first, there is this millimeter. Then there is the centimeter, and then there is the meter, then there is the kilometer. So this quantity called length can be measured in these four different units quite often. And then also we have mass, which can be measured also in these units. So there is the gram, then there is the kilogram, then there is the ton, like that, you see. So there's the ton usually denoted by the small letter T, like that. So these are the units that we have for this quantity. And then as well, we have units for time. For time, we have second, and we have the minute, and we have the hour, you see. So these are the different units that are used for measuring these three quantities, which is what we are going to talk about in the rest of this section, you see. So now we are going to start looking at these quantities one at a time so that we can understand more information about these units that are used for that respective quantity. So we want to know what are the relationships that exist between all these different units, which is the key thing that we'll need if we are to convert from one unit to the other unit, you see. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is length, you see. So we're going to look more on the length, you see. So what are the relationships that are there between the units of length? So when it comes to the units of length, we have the following relationships that one has to know when it comes to the unit of length, you see. So we have a unit which relates the millimeter and the centimeter. So what you should know is that 10 millimeters is actually an equivalent of 1 centimeter. And then also, besides having the unit of the between the millimeter and the centimeter, we have the relationship that exists between the centimeter and the meter, and it goes as follows. So what you should know is that 100 centimeters is actually equal to 1 meter. And then the other thing that you must know also when it comes to the units of length is that there is a relationship that exists between the meter and the kilometer. And what you should know is that 1,000 meters is equivalent to a kilometer, like that, you see. So these are the relationship that we have between these units, you see. So if you look on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, all the numbers that we have are 111s, you see. Then on the left-hand side, we can see that we have numbers that are other than 1. So most the relationship between two units either in maths or physics or everywhere where you meet them, there is always a side in which there is a 1 and there is a side in which there is a number that is none other than 1. So there is a special name that we use to refer to that number. So this number, or this one, we refer to such a number as the conversion factor. You see that? So what you should know is that this number that is none other than 1, which exists within a relationship between two units, we call that a conversion factor. And that conversion factor is the number that you use when you shift from one unit to the other. So which means if you want to move from the millimeter to the centimeter, you have to use 10. If you want to move from the centimeter to the meter, you have to use 100. If you want to move between the meter and the kilometer, you have to use 1000. You see, so it's either you multiply by that factor or you divide by that factor. So later we are going to learn how to determine if we are going to be dividing when moving from one unit or we are going to be multiplying. But the other thing that you should know is the hierarchy of these units. You see, so these units, they are not equivalent, as we can see from these factors. You see that? So the millimeter is the unit which is the smallest from all the other units. And the centimeter is the one that comes next in size. And then we have the meter, which comes next. And then we have the kilometer, like that, you see. So if there is any other unit which comes, then it will come there. So when it comes to length, the millimeter is always the smallest unit. So which means as we go from this direction, heading towards this side, there is an increase in size. So which means the units are getting bigger as we start from the bottom of the hierarchy going top. So this hierarchy is very important, as you are going to see. You see that? So hierarchies are the things that we need. Every time when you are to do any conversion between any set of units, you have to know their relationship in terms of size. Who is the bigger than the other? So units, even if they both represent the same quantity, they do not have the same size in terms of scale. You see, so they're always distinct. There's one which is smaller, there's one which is bigger. And for length, this is the hierarchy. Then, moving on again, we have the relationship that exists now for mass. So for mass as well, we have the following relationships. So we have already talked about that. For mass, we have the gram, the kilogram, and the ton. So one thing that you should know is that 1000 grams in mass is equivalent to a kilogram. And then 1000 kilogram in terms of size is equal to a ton, like that. So those are things. So which means we can see that when it comes to mass, the conversion factor for all the units of mass is just the same. So you can see that it's just 1000, irregardless of which pair of units you are talking about. So that's our conversion factor at this instance. You see. So when it comes to the hierarchy of mass, the gram is the small unit, the kilogram follows in size, and then the ton is the bigger one, like that. So this is the hierarchy that we have for the units that are used for measuring mass. You see. Then now let's move on to time. So what about time now? So when it comes to time, this is what we have. So time. So for time, we know. So one thing that you have to know is that for the time, for the second, 60 seconds is actually equal to a minute. And then 60 minutes is actually equal to the hour, like that. So these are the relationships that we have. So you can see now that for time, to move between two respective units, we see that the factor conversion between the second and minute is 60, and then between the minute and hour is also 60, like that. And also we can see the hierarchy that here it goes as follows. So the second is the smallest unit, followed by the minute, and then finished by the hour. So that's the hierarchy for the unit of time. So now, knowing all this information, it's time for us now to start going deeper into understanding how then do we do the unit conversion. You see, how then do we do the unit conversion? So what we're going to do now is I will demonstrate different examples on how to convert from one unit to the other, so that one, you are going to see how we shift from one unit to other, and also how we use hierarchies. So these hierarchies that have been stated at the bottom, they are very important when you're doing unit conversion. So you are going to see how exactly they come into action when we're doing the process. You see, so before we waste so much time talking about all this, let's start looking at demonstrations. You see. So a typical question that you might get a question like this where they say convert maybe 792 grams to kilograms. So this is a question that may be asked. You can be asked to say, can you convert 792 grams to kilograms? So how will you convert 792 grams to kilograms? You see that? So every time when you are asked to solve a problem like this one, where they ask you to say, can you convert a certain unit to another unit, then the thing that we use is we use an algorithm which I refer to as the SPD algorithm. For unit conversions. You see, so every time when you are asked to do any unit conversion maths, there's always one rule that we use, and we call that the SPD rule or the SPD algorithm. So it's more like the BODMAS kind of thing, but I refer to it as the SPD rule. So what do these three stand for? So the S that you see here stands for small, and then B here stands for big, then D stands for divide. You see, so what this thing is trying to tell you is that every time when you're shifting from a smaller unit to a bigger unit, you always divide. You see, you always divide. So if you're converting from a unit that is small to a unit that is big, you always divide, and you always divide by the conversion factor. You see, so division is done with the conversion factor. You see that? So those are the things that you should know. That when it comes to division, division is a procedure that you do with the conversion factor between the units that you are converting to. You see? So every time when you want to convert from one unit, always check the size. So if you are moving from small to big, then you always divide. Which means if you are moving from big to small, then you multiply. You see? So that's why mostly I usually also provide this algorithm to say the MSPD algorithm. You see, like that. So it can go either this side or it goes that side. So it goes like that. You see. So it here M stands for multiplication now. So in this case, the M that we have here stands for multiplication. While its S still stands for small, B still stands for big, and D stands for divide. You see. So what it simply means now is that every time when you move from a big unit to a small, you multiply. But when you move from a small unit to a big unit, you divide. Like that. You see, so this is the algorithm that we use. So you just have to memorize one of them. You don't have to memorize both of them. So if you stick with the SPD, it's fine. Because now you know that if you are not moving from small to big, you just have to multiply. You see, so the MSBD won't be necessary. And sometimes it can be confusing. That's why I don't usually bring that out. But it depends on you which one you're going to understand much better. Now that we know all this information, then the next thing that we have to now go for is to answer that question. So how can you answer this question that we're given here? So I want to convert from 792 grams, and then I want to go to the kilogram. So every time when you want to convert from one unit to the other, you have to understand what is the relationship between them. You see. So now what is the relationship between these two units that we have? So you have to write it down. So we know that 1000 gram is equal to 1 kilogram. So which means this guy that we have here is the conversion factor, which we also refer to as the CF in uppercase letters, like that. So which means we have to use 1000 to do the conversion. But now, what do we know about the hierarchy? So we know that what we call the gram, it is less than the kilogram. So which means I'm shifting from a gram to a kilogram. So I'm shifting from a small unit. So that's what is happening. I'm shifting from a small unit. I'm going to a big unit. So since I'm shifting from a small to a big unit, it means I'm going to divide. So therefore, that 792 grams that is given is actually equal to 792 over 1000 kilogram, which is equals to what? So when you take 792 and divide it by 1000, we get 0.792 kilogram, like that. So then the unit conversion is done. You see. So the unit conversion is always simple like that. You see, it's always simple like that. So every time when you want to move from big unit to a small, that's how it's work. But now let's look at a problem that is much trickier, see, than this. But remember, everything that I'm doing here, it works even if you're not dealing with the mass and whatever, any unit, you can still use the same techniques. But let's look at another different example. So another different example will go as follows. So they'll say convert 1.3 kilometers to millimeters. You see. So now you want to convert from the kilometer to the millimeter. So if you are to go and look closely at the information that we have concerning the SI units, one of the things that you will realize is that we do not have a relationship that is there between the kilometer and the millimeter. We don't have a direct relationship, you see. So which means now we have to see how exactly can we move from kilometer to millimeter. So to do that, that's where the hierarchy comes in. You see, so according to the hierarchy, we know that the millimeter is always less than the centimeter, and the centimeter is always less than the meter, and the meter is less than the kilometer. So if you look, the two units that we're trying to convert between, they lie here and there. So we do not have a relationship that exists between them directly. You see that? So which means since I want to convert from kilometer and I want to get to the meter, I have to do that in many steps, which means first I have to convert from meter to kilometer because I can't skip something which is in between. And then I move from the meter to the centimeter. And then from the centimeter, I move to the millimeter. So that's the role that is played by the hierarchy. It tells you if you can actually do the conversion directly or you have to perform it in steps. You see, like that. So immediately we can see that whatever I want to obtain, I cannot get it in one step. So what I have to do now is to convert first from kilometer, go to the meter, and then from the meter, go to the centimeter, and then from the centimeter, I go to that. But now let's write the conversion factors for the year. So we know that the conversion factor for between the millimeter, the meter, and the kilometer is 1000. And then we know that the conversion factor between the meter and the centimeter is 100. And then the conversion factor between these two is 10. So that's one thing that we know. So which means first I'm going to take my kilometer and I'm going to convert it to the meter. So what is 1.3 kilometers in meters? So let's check. I'm moving now from big to small. So since I'm moving from big to small, I multiply by the conversion factor, which means I'm going to take 1.3 and then I multiply that by 1000. And this is now in meters. And this is going to be what? So it's going to be 1300, like that. So if you take 1.3 and multiply by 1000, you get 1300. And now this is in meters. Then from meters, now I can shift this to centimeters. So since again I'm moving from a big to a small unit, I multiply by the conversion factor, and now the conversion factor is 100. So I take 1.3 and then I multiply by 100, and this now is in centimeters. And what do I get? So when I multiply this 1.3 times 100, I get 130,000. So I get 130,000 centimeters. Then after that, I convert now to the millimeter. So to convert to the millimeter, I then use the conversion factor. Since I'm moving from big to small, again, I multiply by 10. So I take 1,030, then I multiply by 10. This is now in millimeters. So I just get what? So if I get 1,300,000 millimeters. So that's our final answer. So this is how you do the unit conversion. You see, so you see the role that is played by hierarchies. The hierarchies, they show you if you can do it once off or you have to move in steps. So since the kilometer and the millimeter, they are not directly related, you start from the portion of the hierarchy where you are and you move towards where you want to go. You see, and then you check your movement. Are you moving from a big unit to a small? So if you're moving from a big unit to a smaller one, you always multiply. From a small to a bigger one, you always divide. So this is how units are converted. But then sometimes you cannot be asked just these two simple things like these ones. Sometimes they can ask you some strange question whereby they then say, they can say convert now 25 centimeter squared to millimeter squared. Now they can start talking about squared units. But if you look from our discussion, there was never an instant where we talked about the relationship between the square unit or the cubed unit or whatsoever. You see, but you can get questions like these, whereby now they have taken something and they have started squaring it, and then they want you to convert from one squared unit to another squared unit. So how does that work? You see, so when the units are squared, when you have units that are squared, you can't use the conversion factors of unsquared units. So when units are squared, you have to find a new conversion factor for those squared units. So what you do first, you write what you know between these two units. So what do we know about these two units? We know that between these two units, 10 millimeters is actually equal to 1 centimeter. You see, so that's one thing that we know. And this is a relationship that exists between these two units when none of them is squared. So if you square them, then what happens? So if you take these units and square them, then you will get 10 squared millimeter squared is equals to 1 squared centimeter squared. So this implies 100 millimeter squared is actually equal to 1 centimeter squared. So which means the conversion factor now between the millimeter square and the centimeter square is 100. So that's your conversion factor. So which means now you have to use that as your conversion factor. So therefore now how do we convert? So I'm moving from a big unit. So I'm moving from 25 centimeters squared and I'm going to a small unit, which is the millimeter squared. So I have to multiply. So I take my 25 and then I multiply it with 100. And then this answer is now in millimeter square. So I see that I get 2,500 millimeter square. You see. So these techniques, they're applicable everywhere. So even if, let's say, we were to cube these units to say find the relationship between millimeter cubed and meter cubed, then you're going to use the same strategies as well. like that. So you just take the initial relationship that you have, and then from that initial relationship, you cube it. But I know that most of the time people, they always understand better when there's a demonstration. So let's demonstrate that. So you can be given a question like this, where they say convert something like, let's say 0.00125 meter squared to millimeter squared. So now they can say convert that. So how are you going to do it? So now let's look at what is going on here. So if you were to take a closer look at what is going on here, you will see that according to the hierarchy, we know that first we have the millimeter, and then we have the centimeter, and then we have the meter. So I'm concerned with these two units, this one and this one. So there is no direct relationship between them. So I have to convert from here to here, and then from here to there. So which means now I have to know the relationships that exist between these two square units. So first, we have already seen from the previous example that what do we know? So we know already that. So we know already that from the previous example that we did, we know that 100 millimeter squared is equal to the centimeter squared. So we know that 100 millimeter squared is equals to 1 centimeter squared. So what we do not know now is the conversion factor between the centimeter square and the meter square. So now, also what do we know? So we come and say, also what do we know between the meter, centimeter and the meter? We know that 100 centimeters is actually equal to 1 meter. So I square, 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 square. What do I get? So what is 100 square? So if you take 100 and square it, you'll see that you get 10,000 centimeters square is equals to 1 meter square, like that, because the square of 1 is just 1. So which means the conversion factor now for these two, so which means the conversion factor for the centimeter and meter is this one, like that. So which means now, since I'm given a meter and I want to go to the millimeter, I'll first go to the meter. You see, so I'm first go to the centimeter. So I have 0.00125 meter square. So I can convert that to centimeter square by multiplying by 10,000. So I take 0.00125 and I multiply by 10,000. This is already now in centimeter square. And what does that give us? So if you take that 0.00125 and multiply by 10,000, you get 12.5. Now we have a centimeter square. Now to go to the millimeter square, which we are looking for, we now take this 12.5 and then we multiply it with the conversion factor, which is 100. So we multiply this by 100. This now is in millimeter squared, and therefore finally we have this multiplied by 100, which give us 1,250. So that's all about unit conversion. So this is everything that you need to know when it comes to the conversion of units. So now you can practice it and see how it goes. You see. But my goal actually was not to put a problem like this one, was to put it in terms of cubed. So even if they were going to cube, we're going to apply cubes everywhere and follow the same procedures as well. So thank you for watching. So see you next time. So if you haven't subscribed, you can subscribe to my channel, and that will keep motivating me to continue making such videos that can help you guys. Otherwise, see you next time.